Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, on behalf of the family, I want to thank you so very, very much for being here with them on such short notice. I must ask, for the dignity of our service, anyone who has a cell phone that's still on, please turn it off or put it on a silent mode for the dignity of our service. Conducting services, Rabbi Edward Davis from Young Israel. Not that he needs introduction. Rabbi, along with members of the family. Right? Okay. Thank you.
It's appropriate that we say Tehillim first. I call upon Rabbi Weinstock to have the honors.
On a couple of occasions, Abe had mentioned to me that he wasn't exactly a compliant patient, and that, but in his defense, he would always tell me that there's really only one true doctor, the Rofei Cholim. This notion, this idea of emunah, is part of the legacy that I take with me as who Abe was. And in this past week's Parsha, when Yaakov Avinu is speaking to his descendants, his grandchildren, and he tells them, V'karei bahem shemi, that you will be known through my name, I can't help but think that part of the legacy that he leaves to his children and his grandchildren is this element of emunah and bitachon, and faith and strength in God. Therefore, it's really an honor for me to open the service with a chapter of Tehillim composed by David HaMelech in response to crisis and faith. He said these words of Tehillim. Mizmor David, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot dashe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo, gam ki elech begeit tzalmavet, lo irara ki ata imadi, shiftecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan, Naget sororoi di shantav Hashemen roshi kosi revaya ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai v'shavti b'veit Adonai li'orech yamim.
Call upon Dr. Adam Splaver. Adam transcends the medical world to become the patient's best friend, as he was in this case too.
How apropos this week we read the Parshat Vayechi when Yaakov Avinu was in his deathbed, on his deathbed, with all of his children surrounding him after they've all gone down to Egypt. And as you can picture Yaakov laying in his bed, the Parsha says, Kol eile shivtei Yisrael, shnei masar v'zos asher diber lahem avihem, vayvrech otam ish asher kivirchato beirachato. Basically, Yaakov Avinu was able to identify each and every one of his children's strengths, each and every one of his children's passions, each and every one of his children's abilities. And based on that, he was able to give each and every one a single bracha. Rashi states that the reason why we know that he did this in a personal light as opposed to a generalized type of a blessing was because the pasuk uses the word bracha over and over and over again. The bracha that Abe left for his children, the bracha that Abe left for his family, for his grandchildren, was the fact that he could see the individual characteristics, the strengths, the merits of each and every one of his children. Abe had the ability to see beyond that which was superficial. He was someone who rose to the challenge of life. He really did have a very, very hard life. But he had a wonderful family. But if you look further in this week's Parsha, in terms of what's commented on this one pasuk, the Orach Chaim actually states something very, very interesting. He states that not only was Yaakov able to give the bracha to each and every individual child, but he did it on condition that they use that bracha to help out the family as a whole. And that's Abe's legacy. Abe's legacy is to have his children, his grandchildren, everyone to pull together using their strengths, using their characteristics, to help the family as a whole. And with that, I leave you and leave the entire community to take that bracha, to use your individual characteristics, your strengths, to build, to be Balei Tzedakah like Abe was, and to be one nation, just like our father Yaakov Avinu.
His son-in-law, Joey, please.
My father-in-law lived up to his name, Abraham. His specialty was Hachanas Orchim. His house, his table, his office was always open and filled with guests from all backgrounds. Rabbis, businessmen, collectors, homeless. They were always in his house and in his office. The first thing he would do when you get to his office was offer you a drink, a glass of wine, a soda. You cannot sit down one moment without you having a drink. He made sure that you had something. Even in his dying moments in the hospital, when he could barely talk, and two of his friends came in, he said to his son, Phil, please get them water. We couldn't even understand what he was saying, but we were closer, and that's what he said. Please get them water. He was a Ish Yashad. In business, he was as straight as an arrow. He would always say to his tenants, a handshake is as good as a lease. The only thing you have to worry about is something happened to me. That's how he conducted his whole life. He was always straight. When I first moved down to Florida, I went to work with him to the office, and we drove down on the highway. Got off at I-95. We stopped at the light on Hollywood Boulevard, right at the crossing, and he went to buy a newspaper. He opened his window, and the newspaper guy was there. Said, "Hi, Abe." So I said, "How do you? The guy knows you." I said, "This is very surprising." And he gave him a few dollars, and I said, "But the paper only cost 50 cents. Why do you give him extra money?" He says, "So this way he could buy some food." When collectors, you would come to the office or to the house, and sometimes you knew they were a sketch, or they actually work for the yeshiva, and you knew they get half of what they collect is commission to them, and that all the money was going to yeshiva, he would still give them with open heart. And I would ask him, "But you know these guys are a sketch, why are you giving them?" And his answer to me was, "Because they have to make a living too." To work for him, you had to be down and out. He would hire the Hollywood less fortunate. A job that would take a professional tradesman one time to do a job would take us 2 or 3 times. But he didn't care. That's how he was. He just hired them and just to give them work. He always worried about the less fortunate. Another thing he would do with the work is, when I learned from him, every day he would stop at lunchtime and go around to find his workers and always give them $10, $10 to buy lunch to all his employees. He made sure every day that they had money for lunch. And that was on him, wasn't from their pay. Just make sure they had lunch. He even gets better than that. So we need a score sheet to work in the office, because every day after work, all the employees used to come into him and take $10 to $20 towards their salary on Friday. Then on Friday, we had to go through a whole score sheet, how much they took. But he did this to make sure that they don't go hungry at night. He was, years ago, in the shul, when it first started, there was no house committee. And anytime there was a maintenance problem, my father used to go, stop work, what he had to do, and send his employees to the shul and take care of whatever necessary had to be done. Members of the community, I remember, always came to my father-in-law, always asking for advice, and he always gave it gladly. Another trait he had, many people wanted to invest money with him, go partners with him, and he would never take money from people, because he always told me, if I take their money and I invest it and I lose it, I'm be obligated to pay it back. So he wouldn't do it. He was as modest as could be. You could just see how he lived his life. I remember when we went to buy a car or so, he just went to the salesman. He took any car on the lot. Color didn't matter. Features didn't matter. Whatever they had, he took it on the spot and he was happy with it. That's why we always had great cars. You always notice his cars were always gray, and that's how he was. He lived his life by the saying, Hasameach v'chalko. He always was saying that. It did not matter if he sold the property too early, too late, we made money, or he didn't make as much. He said we made something, whatever it is, he was always happy. He was always happy. Another trait is the love he had for the kids and grandkids. Over the last few years, the love he had for my kids and all the grandkids, when my son Ralph started going to high school and started taking the bus, I remember I was on the way home from the gym and me turning down 41st Court, see my father down the block, and he would always wait to make sure that Ralph got on the bus. And then he would call Barney and say Ralph got on the bus and all. As Ralph got older and he started driving, every few days my father would come and just give him money to make sure he had money for gas, and that's always looking out for the kids. By hearing his stories over the years, he fulfilled the mitzvah of kavod et avicha. All the stories how he took care of his parents and he was always with his father and his mother. He really took care of that mitzvah. And proof of this was he instilled that into his kids, and you could see the love that all his kids had for him. It was amazing calling him, picking him, taking him. It was amazing how the love that they all shared together. Further proof of this, which I experienced in the last year or so, the dedication that my wife had for him. For the last year almost, every single day, my wife would call, pick him appointments, blood tests, bring his medicine at nights, taking him shopping, making dinner, calling him, just the love she had for her father, and that's just rubbed off what she saw in the house. I would like to personally thank my wife for all she did to take care of her father, because it was amazing. It was an amazing trait that she learned from him.
Representing the children, Mark.
Is a style to find a pasuk for the deceased that really encapsulates them. And when I thought about my father and all of his wonderful traits, I couldn't limit it to one. I found the book of Mishlei, chapter 3. My father really liked that sefer. And the first 5 Pesukim really, I think, encapsulate my father more than any other. Beni torati al tishkach u'misvotai yisur libvecha. My son, forget not my teaching, but let thy heart keep my commandments. Ki orech yamim u'shnot hayim v'shalom yosifu lach. For length of days and years of life and peace will they add to thee. Chesed ve'emet al ya'azbucha. Let not kindness and truth forsake thee. Koshram al gargirotecha, kotvem al luach libecha. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thy heart. Umsachen b'sechel tov be'anei Elohim ve'adam. And you shall find grace and good favor in the sight of God and man. V'tachal Adonai b'chol libecha ve'binatecha al tisha'en. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart, and lean not upon thine own understanding. When I think about my father, Abe Saada, Abraham ben Pinchas, so many wonderful thoughts and memories come to mind. In his 86 years and 9 months in this world, he saw and experienced so much. He encountered and befriended, educated and learned from, inspired and touched so many. In the following moments, I will attempt to capture some of the aspects of my father that made him such a virtuous and special person to his family, community, and nation. My father was a person who really enjoyed life. He loved engaging friends and meeting new people, and he always did this with a smile and b'simcha. He loved to laugh and joke around with people. My father had an energy and a charisma unparalleled by anyone I have ever known. And I believe this is one of the reasons People gravitated toward him and enjoyed being in his presence. However, this is not what was amazing about my father. What is amazing about my father is how he expressed this effervescent personality and the context which he did it in. For all that knew him, he was fun and entertaining. Yet, he had a deep compassion and love for people, which fueled his being to do so many wonderful things. Chesed ve'emet al ya'azbucha. Kindness. My father was a very kind person, as you heard from Joey and others. He had a huge heart. He always went out of his way to help so many in various ways, whether it was sending his maintenance staff to fix something at a friend's house or offering advice to a peer. My father was there to help those in need. When people came to our home and office, he would always offer them something to eat and drink. Two amazing examples of this occurred last week while he was bedridden in the hospital. Joey mentioned one earlier. By the time he came to the hospital last week, he was already very weak and could not get out of bed. The second night in the hospital, my mother prepared one of his favorite foods, the fried kibbeh, hoping that he would eat and regain strength. However, my father was not one who would keep this delicacy for himself. Suffice to say, he shared it with his guests, including the new hospital doctor that admitted him and other business associates that came. A few days after this event, my father's condition worsened, and he had a hard time speaking. One night, he was visited by a very old friend who's here today. He motioned to my brother Phil and tried to tell him something. Not understanding his winded speech, Phil asked him to write down what he wanted, and he wrote on a pad, "Offer him some ice water." He was a very charitable person. He donated to the needy and employs those that needed work. He made financial contributions to institutions and synagogues as well. He helped many individuals in financial need. He often, anonymously, donated to yeshivot and helped families that could not afford tuition. He once explained why he did this. He answered, "When I was a boy, we could not afford to go to kitab, as also known as cheder. And he said that somebody paid for me to go to cheder. I have to do the same." Honesty. Emet, my father was also known to many as Honest Abe. And the reason was that his word was his binding. My dad tells a story going back 30 plus years. He once went to a public property auction that he found out about last minute. As you all know, a property auction requires that you bring a certified bank check as a deposit. He didn't have that time, but despite this obstacle, he figured he would attend the auction. My father ended up being the high bidder at this auction. But he disclosed to the auctioneer, and he said, "I do not have a cashier's check, but I only have a personal check." The auctioneer said publicly, "Mr. Saada does not need a cashier's check." Bini, Torati al tishkach, u'mitzvotai yisor libecha. He was a very knowledgeable and intelligent person. My father didn't go to college, and he barely finished high school. But he was sharp. He could calculate math problems at a remarkable speed. He was well-read, had a wide range of knowledge in many areas such as history, geography, politics, world affairs, real estate, stocks, and others. I was once foolishly surprised when he told me that when he was single, he used to read books on psychology by Sigmund Freud, Greek philosophy of Aristotle and Plato, at his leisure. Humility. For all of his knowledge and success that he had, my father was extremely humble. I'm not just talking about the brown pickup truck that he used to drive. A family friend once asked what they should do with a certain property. I was young and new in the business, so I said, "Ask my father. I think he's pretty knowledgeable in real estate." After this person approached my father, telling him what I said, he came to me very upset and he said, "Why did you tell them that I was very knowledgeable in real estate? Please don't do that." I obviously didn't heed his request. Tradition. My father loved the state of Israel and his Jewish tradition. He would always proudly tell people that he is a Syrian Jew and his family originated from Aleppo. He was so proud of our unique customs and received such great joy educating people about the different practices in our Sephardic tradition. One of my father's greatest enjoyments was to hear his children and grandchildren read from the Torah. When any of us were practicing the weekly reading, he would quiet the room around and made sure he could hear every word that the reader was saying. Personally, my siblings and I share a deep love with my father of our heritage. My fondest memory with my father is praying next to him on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. We would sing the tefillot and the selichot together, singing Oked v'hanekad v'hamizbeach with such fervor and love. Umsachen v'sechel tov be'enei Elohim ve'adam. He found grace and good favor in the sight of God and men. My father was loved by so many. My parents were one of the founding members of the synagogue. My father was loved and respected for various reasons by so many of these members and their children. It wasn't until this week that I realized to what extent that is. My friends and those of my siblings loved to hang out with my father growing up. They loved to hear his stories and joke around with him. What's even more amazing is how he is loved by his grandchildren's friends. I think half of this community's children call my father Jiddo and my mother Teta. Wisdom. Lessons learned from him. My father imparted so much wisdom to his children and grandchildren, some of which I mentioned previously. But I wouldn't do him justice if I didn't give some of those wisdom in these idioms that he used to tell us. And I'd like to just share a few of them. The rabbi knows this one well. If the deal is too good to be true, then it probably is. It is better to be lucky than smart. And this one I always found very perplexing at first, but then later I came to realize when my father used the word luck, he meant love of God, from God. God's divine grace. It's not how much you make, it's how much you save. He would teach me this one all the time. I used to write the leases for the business a lot. He would tell me a contract is only as good as a person signing it. He would tell us to grow slow in business and at our own pace. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart, and lean not upon thine own understanding. My father had a deeply committed, yet respectfully simple faith. And I use this in the most respectful and honorable terms, because I think today a lot of us aren't as committed or have more questions, and I feel his faith was very deeply rooted and strong, and I'll illustrate what I mean. Anytime we'd finish a meal, he would always say, Baruch Hashem, we ate. He would reinforce always the idea that Hashem is the one that provides for us. When he was undergoing the cancer treatments, we would try to encourage him of how great he was responding to the treatments and how he will regain his strength. And he would respond, only the big doctor upstairs can ensure that. He loves to tell this story in particular, which I think really encompasses his faith. There was once a reverend of one of his, he rented out a storefront to a church. And a reverend came by and he was proselytizing his faith to my father. The man was clearly very knowledgeable in the Old Testament and was able to use it to prove his faith. My father kindly responded, "Sir, I attended the Kitab since I'm 5 years old. You are not changing my mind." My father was a man who embodied and exemplified kindness, compassion, and humility. He loved wisdom, and he valued his tradition and sought to teach his family and the world of its virtue. My father did so many wonderful things with joy and happiness, and was admired and respected by all who knew him. He has touched hundreds of people in some form or another. His passing is a tremendous loss to his wife, children, grandchildren, the Hollywood community, the Brooklyn community, and all of Am Yisrael. I have to say some thank yous. First, I would like to thank my mother. For 49 years, Mom, you took care of Dad. You were at his side through thick and thin, in every step of his life. You loved him, you honored him, and took care of him, and our whole family. You are truly the great woman behind this great man. Second, I would like to thank my siblings. I have never seen children that have honored and respected a parent more than Bonnie, Philip, and Jimmy. You all loved Dad so much, and he loved you and all of your children. We, as a family and as a community, give Bonnie so much thanks. You spent every day with Dad during the last 6 months and more. You made sure that he took every medication and he went to every doctor's appointment. You brought your family to eat dinner with him every Shabbat and on most school nights. I cannot do that justice. The grandchildren. There are so many to name, thank God. At this short time, I will not do that. But I wanted to tell every one of these grandchildren, Jadil loved you so much. You were his world. All of you. You made him proud, and you will continue to make him proud. Dr. Whitland, thank you for treating my father. You helped give our family extra time with Dad, which we cherished so every moment of that. Dr. Adam Splaver, you have been taking care of my father for the last 11 years, I think, or more. You helped give our family, you put up with his cancellations and his last-minute appointments. He loved you very much, and you are like our fifth brother. Rabbi Davis, you are my father's rabbi and friend. He loved you and respected you. Thank you for all you have done for my dad and our family. Rabbi, you have helped to build a wonderful community in Young Israel of Hollywood. The love and support that we have received from so many members and family has been so touching. Words cannot say how much we appreciate this beautiful and vibrant community. Hollywood will always be home to Abe Saada and family. Tehi nishmato sirra v'suror ha'chayim.
As straight as Abe was, he's still an enigma. I guess he's an enigma because we don't meet too many people like this. And from day one of our being here, and I remember those first years, we ran a Friday night dinner to encourage people who were maybe on the periphery. I see some of those who were at that dinner, and so many of them, they sold their house as the Sadas did. Abe sold the house on 46th Avenue in order to buy a house closer so he could walk to shul, and initially walking with Bonnie to shul every Shabbat. And this was Abe. And once he stepped across that threshold, there was no going back. Not with Abe. It would just be that way. And months ago, I think it was May, I get a phone call from Abe. And of course, what can I do for you? Abe, what's up? And he says, I'm just calling to thank you. I said, thank me for what? For building this community. And I'm trying to explain to him, hey, it's not me. No, but he insists that everybody here knows. I might get a lot of credit, but it's because of a lot of you who do all the work. And Abe was that backbone. He was a spine that everybody could build upon. Without the Abe Saadas, you don't get a community like this. So even though he's thanking me, I just said, you're welcome, Abe, but you're a partner. And that was that. I want to share with you what several months ago, he was on death's door. And Adam called me, and I rushed over to the hospital, and he's in intensive care, getting oxygen. And I walked in, and the children kind of eased out the door, figuring I'll say Vidoy with him, I'll say Shema with him. And I take off the mask and say, Abe, would you like to say Shema with me? And he opens his eyes, looks at me and says, Rabbi, I have a piece of property I have to sell in Orlando. He wasn't ready, and that was that, And it reminds me, at Ralph's bar mitzvah, Abe offered I should go with them to Eretz Yisrael for the bar mitzvah, and I did. And of course, I'm his guest, and I'm seated on the plane next to Abe Saada for 11 hours. The world according to Abe Saada. And I said, Abe, would you like to take a rest? Want to take a nap? He says, no, I enjoy talking to you. And of course I told this to the kids, and there was a Jimmy who said to me last night, yeah, you got 11 hours. I got 44 years of that. This last time we were in Israel, we were with Laura, and she's having a terrible time. But on the other hand, when it comes out as to why, she was FaceTiming with her grandfather every day. Every day. Because that was, like Mark said, we think about how much he gave to us. You supplied him with chiyut, with life, with vitality. That's what you gave him. And my wife and I sat with you afterwards and said, go home. And of course he goes to the hospital the next day, and you left, and you had to be here. That's all. You had to be here. And we arrived. Mira and I arrived on Wednesday, and a couple hours later I was at the hospital, because he was in the hospital, and he was not a good way. And again, we removed the mask, the oxygen, and he looks at me, and this time he says, how's Sam? That was the first thing out of his mouth. How is Sam? Meaning Sam Schachter, good buddy. And then he looks at me. I told him, Sam's sick. And then he says, I love you. That night he went home to be on hospice care. The next day I came to him, and he couldn't respond. Phil was in the room with me when I was with him. And he was really trying to respond to me, but he was too far. He was crossing that threshold at that moment. And the difficulty was there, but I felt, his last words to me were, I love you. So how does it get better than that? It doesn't. And that's probably what he said to all of you as well, because it was deep and sincere. A very, very special person. You talk about luck. This man had luck. You ever hear some of the stories? I hope that during the Shiva, you'll tell more stories about your father, because the people here who will come, they don't know half the stories of your father. Yeah, this American flag, he served Korea time, 1951 to 53. He's in Georgia, basic training, and he crossed, he had a day or two off, he crossed into South Carolina, decided that the food at the base is terrible, he's going back to Brooklyn to eat to his mother's house. And he went AWOL. And the army caught up with him, said, you better come back. He comes back, I mean, he could have been court-martialed, this is wartime. No, they give him a $50 fine. And then they give him a choice. Most of his unit was already dispatched to Korea. You go to Germany to help rebuild. And he tells them, no, I'm not going to Germany. They killed my people. So but they accommodated him. And he, did his time in service, and that was that. In 1960s, he had this thing, again, I got to go to Syria. I'm going to Aleppo. So he's in Europe, with American passport, he's American born, he goes to Jordan. And from Jordan, he figures he'll go into Syria. So you cross the border, you have to go through Jordanian officials, and then, 20 feet away, you cross into Syria. So he goes to the Jordanians, and, he's American, but he speaks Arabic, that was the family language, and they said to him, okay, Abraham, they told him in Arabic, they said, what's your father's name? And he says, Pinchas. You're Jewish. You can't go in there. You're crazy. You know what they're going to do to you? This is Abe Saada. I'm going anyway. He goes to the Syrian side, and the guy looks at his thing. What's your father's name? George. Go ahead, Abe. And he goes into Syria. That's what I mean about lucky. You need siyata deshmaya, but he knew that. It's not like that he just did it. No, Hashem Yazor, Hashem Yivarech. He knew that's what it is. That's what it takes. There's a tremendous amount of love and giving that he had. He was of that variety that if I greeted him, no matter what, if he had money in his pocket, he would give it to me. He didn't want to do things on credit. No, not this kind of thing. Money in my pocket, here. Give it to people who need it. Here. Give it to the project you're working on. And that's what it was. People, you talk about the help that he offered some of the shul. We had Woody. and that was one of Abe's projects. As you all know. And those of you who are veterans in the shul, that we had Woody. But this was, and Woody, I even took him sometimes to the AA meetings because he was a recovering alcoholic, but he would never get off the bandwagon, not because of me, because he would have to look Abe in the face. So he was straight because of Abe, and that's you're talking about saving a person's life. He did it, and I only know that one story because I knew Woody, but. There are many others. Yeah, it's written here, Mark. If it looks too good to be true, it is. I live by that. And there are other aphorisms I learned from your father that 100%, this is what it's all about. I also know, and I know sometimes things that I might not, but he was helping other members of the shul in business. And I'm talking about thousands of dollars. And it was all a handshake. Never was anything written down. And I would tell him, Abe, the Gemara says you have to write it down. And you have to have witnesses. This is the way you protect yourself. He wouldn't listen. This man, when you talk about educated, formal education, he lacked. And he was one of the smartest people I knew without a formal education. And that was his trademark in life. But people respected him for exactly that. I have people, how do I know about it? Because people told me I was down and out, I needed some investment to get back on my feet. Abe Saada gave it to me. And I was absolutely determined to succeed and pay him back. And I did. And then when it happened again, I went to him again, he gave me again. Because when Abe believed in you, and he saw in your face that you were real, he will help you. And that's the way he lived his life from day one, all the years that I've known him in this community. He never deviated from any of that. He's a supporter. He's a man who knows and has dignity. Ein ish meit ella liishto. Gemara says when a man dies, the one who's going to feel it the most is his wife. And I know Marky thanked you, but we thank you too. But I ask your forgiveness for that. The one thing I always understand, something that we always exchange. Gina, I love you. And I know it's returned. Because we are there together. And you were with him thick or thin, and when he was, these last couple of years weren't easy. And you got the brunt of it. We all know that. But that's maybe what the Gemara is talking about. No one's going to feel it the way you do. But one thing that he did do, make sure all your children are going to be so devoted to you. And all the grandchildren are devoted to you because of that. But I want you to take grace, because I want you to begin to share some of the stories with your children, grandchildren, and with the rest of them, because their stories are priceless. You could write the book. And you had a partner who helped create worlds. And I'm very, very fortunate that he was a partner of ours at Young Israel. Anytime I called, I think they kept him on my Kol Nidre list. Usually I get some of the ones who are more difficult. But no, they always kept Abe on my list because I didn't have to talk to him about it. I would call, and if the call was a couple weeks before Yom Kippur, he knew. I didn't have to make my pitch, nothing. Rabbi, put me down for 2,600. Done deal. And I give him a bracha, and that's what he really wanted. He wanted that bracha, and that was it. I love him. It's such a loss to us. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim sheva esrei shana. Yaakov lived in Mitzrayim for 17 years. And some of the Farshim say those were his best years. Why were those 17 years the best years of Yaakov's life? Because he had his family intact. They weren't all together for years. And now all of a sudden, they're all back together. All the children, all the grandchildren, they're all together with Yisrael Saba. This has been a great time. You guys, I knew when you were small, and you grew up. And sometimes we don't want to see small children grow up too fast. But you have a lot of your father's character traits. That strong-willed personality, it's there. But you also knew, and I heard it last night, whatever it is, it's going to be Shalom Bayit now. That's what I heard from you. It's going to be Shalom Bayit. These were good years. At the same time as being tough ones, they were good years. Vayechi Yaakov, because he had his children and grandchildren, that gave him chayim, that gave him life. That's what all of you have been giving him now. And I want you to carry that. That's your legacy. More than the success, more than learning business, more than your attitude with people that you learned from him, everything, I want you to take that legacy that Shalom Bayit is the biggest bracha, but it doesn't come without an effort. Work on it. Work on it, the Shem Shamayim and the Shem Avi Mori, in honor of your father. That's what's the biggest bracha that you have, and that you keep it going. So I thank all of you for the ride, and this is just a hiccup in our ride together. We'll continue traveling together. And we're going to end this with the traditions of the Sephardi traditions. Some of us here have never seen before. I've seen it only a couple times in my life, but we're going to do Hatarat Nedarim, Tikiyat Shofar. We're going to do what's necessary to be done. And then we're going to go out on the premises and do the Kfura. But I want you to hold on to your traditions. As the minyan during the week at the Shiva will be a minyan b'nusach Edot HaMizrach. It'll be in the Sephardi Nusach. Because that's what's important. When Bnei Sephardim came around, I lost him, but I didn't lose him. you know as well as I do, I didn't lose him. But you took him, but that was home. That's what he was used to even more, and yet it strengthened my relationship with him anyway. So who am I to say different? But you know something? We have a tradition of stopping 7 times. Because you're escorting a person to Rakia, to Shamayim, and there are 7 levels. You want to go all the way up. We are also stopping because this is a stop to Eretz Yisrael. I want to make sure that we are going to fulfill his wish. Not now. Okay? We'll do it in steps. Okay? But we will get there. All right. Tehei nishmatot tzura b'tzura chayim. May his neshama be bound up in the bond of eternal life. And that's the bracha that we all want to see. We love each and every one of you. And that's the love that we inherit from Abe, Avi Mori, Avraham Sava. Very special person. Please rise. Gedolo Eitzav Rav Hadili Asher Inecha Pekuchot Akol Da'achei B'nei Adam Lateit Le'ish Kidrachav V'chifrim Hadalav L'hagid Ki Asher Adonai Tzuri V'lav Latabot Adonai Natan V'Adonai Lakach Yishem Adonai V'varach V'hurachum Yechaper Avon V'lo Yashchit V'yabon Hashevapo V'lo Ye'ir Kol Chamato. If you all join me over here, the children. Achinu Ata Mutarim Lach Mutarim Lach Mutarim Lach Muchulim Lach Muchulim Lach Muchulim Lach Shuyim Lach Shuyim Lach Shuyim Lach Ein Kan Nedarim Ein Kan Shvuot Ein Kan Kabbalot, Ein Kan Haskamot, Ein Kan Minhagim, Ein Kan Charimim, Ein Kan Asurim, Ein Kan Konamot, aber Yesh Kan Mechila, Slicha, V'Chaparam, Be'en B'olam Hazeh, Be'en B'olam Haba, Shem Sheyizkimu V'Hitiru L'cha Beit Din Shamata, Kach Yazkimu Yatiru L'cha Beit Din Shamalo, V'Sor Avonecha V'Chatotecha Tukupar. You say Kaddish. Yes, huh? Yeah.
Kadash Merabah, Murach Ruzev, Amit Masutev, Yasmach Pushkanev, Kalev, Shechem, Bor, Yometom, Chayed Rechov Yisrael, Bagalav, Zon Charib, Amen. Merabah, Bevarach, Ve'adan, Ve'al Maya, Yitparach, Yishtatach, Yitpa'ar, Yitromam, Yitnaseh, Yitadar, Yitalev, Yitala, Shemeh, Yikusha, Bechov, Elam, Chov, Bechata, Shirata, Yishachada, Nechmata, Damiram, Da'amar,
Okay.